Okay, very shortly now, you'll see a red border, I think.
Yeah, I think we're live now, aren't we? So should we get going then? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Council and Trade Union Joint Committee. I'm Councillor Peter Mason, the new leader of the Council, and I understand that, well, the first thing to say is this is my first meeting of the Council and Trade Union Joint Committee ever. So it's a pleasure to be here in sort of my new capacity and new role. My understanding is that we rotate this chair usually from year to year, and it just so happens that this year was the council side chairing. So it's a real pleasure for me to sort of take over that, and look forward to today's discussion, but also discussions I'm sure we'll have at future meetings. So it's a welcome to the people who are attending this meeting, but also I'm sure to the people who are watching live on YouTube, which we're now broadcasting to. We're going to sort of get through all the formalities and we'll head into sort of the main discussion. So apologies for absence and substitutions. Keith?
Councillor Stafford is substituting for Councillor Kumar, and I have had no apologies.
Sukminder, go for it.
Thanks, Peter. Can I suggest that from our side, Keith, that we can give you the list of apologies that we've received outside of this meeting, just to save time?
That's fine with me, yeah, okay.
Cool. Perfect, thank you.
I don't believe there are any urgent matters. Any declarations of interest?
None.
No declarations of interest? No matters to be considered in private. Minutes of the last meeting. We do have quite a so what we do sort of have quite long minutes on the basis of verbatim, so not necessarily going to propose to go through page by page, but if there are any issues that people did want to flag in terms of the accuracy of those minutes, so I guess speak now. Sukminder?
Yeah, thank you. And also another issue in terms of saving time. I don't think there's any issues relating to the minutes, so I'm going to suggest that we approve and agree the minutes and then head straight into our items, which encapsulate a number of the issues that we need to discuss with yourselves.
Great. Well, if people are happy to agree the minutes, then we can say agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
Great. Good. So, yeah, employee side items. Over to you.
Well, thank you, and welcome as a new chair and as the new leadership. But we have had an informal meeting that we'd like to basically encapsulate items 1 and 2 because they're all about COVID. We want to hear from you, Peter, and your colleagues about the way forward. We know where we are now. We're waiting for the July announcement in terms of a roadmap. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Is it going to be a cautious and measured approach, which we would be supporting and welcoming? We do know that there are some proposals for recovery. We're aware that libraries are looking forward to reopening on a phased basis, which we're obviously supportive of. We're obviously wanting to be consulted at the earliest opportunity, and we know that Paul is very keen for consultation to take place in terms of recovery. So we'd like your thinking in terms of business as usual, services reopening. What's your recovery plan? Increasing occupation and reoccupation of council buildings, service areas, considering reopening. That's not to say that we are already providing an excellent council service for many people that are working from home, and many people are and have been out and working during a pandemic. So, you know, hats off to everyone who's done a sterling job wherever they've been working from. And I'll just pass it over to you because we need to get from you a sense of your thinking, your strategy, what will happen in terms of reaction to the July announcement, and we'd like to do things the Ealing way, the way we're used to.
Yeah. And so I'm going to thank you. And, I sort of join you in saying that, one of the most sort of remarkable things I was able to sort of witness when I was sort of the cabinet member and particularly responsible for Ealing Together, but was the way in which the council pulled together to sort of get through probably what's been the most difficult thing that anybody's had to do, not just in this generation, but probably for sort of multiple generations too. And if you think about the challenges that the council's faced, and I've said this sort of so many times to both the staff groups that I've sort of met or sort of been with virtually, each and every sort of staff member, of course, is a human, and they have reacted and responded both in terms of their public service in all of the contexts that they have, whether that's their own struggles of being under lockdown or having lost loved ones or being very, very distant from friends and family. And, I sort of, I've said that so many times that I think it's important that we do note that and we sort of understand the hardships that people have individually and collectively gone through at the same time as doing their jobs. But as we sort of emerge from the last remnants of lockdown, I think it's absolutely right to say that we're going to take a caution and a risk-based approach to both the reopening of our services and equally the reopening of the buildings that people operate from. I sort of don't think in the wake of COVID, not just for the council, but also probably for employees and for employers sort of eeling over, that we're going to be able to do things that we did in the past in the same way. The nature of work as we know it will change in terms of how people operate and the flexibilities that people have had. I don't think we're ever going to be able to, or I don't think there's a single employer out there right now who's ever going to be able to make an argument ever again that flexible working arrangements are something that employers can't provide, because all of those sort of silly fears of productivity disappearing or people not sort of meeting their responsibilities, all of those have been blown out of the water because of the response to the way that people have had to work under the COVID conditions. So, the world of work will be different, but of course we need to take a sort of a risk-based approach to the way that we do then start thinking about opening up services. And sort of since being the leader and, if you like, sort of joining our sort of day-to-day response to the pandemic, as well as sort of our strategic decisions about what gets opened, when it gets opened, how services respond to the lifting of restrictions and how we sort of bring services back on house. All of that sort of underpinned by ensuring that we, as I say, have taken that risk-based approach to sort of understanding what the consequences will be, not just for service delivery, but also for the staff delivering those services. I think that's super important. We're obviously in a situation, particularly with Percival House and our buildings, that we sort of need to take a risk-based approach, ensuring that we've got social distancing in place for as long as we absolutely need to have that in place. And making sure that people have got flexibility, and bearing in mind that the workforce is going to face some challenges when it comes to Percival House no longer being there, which perhaps isn't that far away either. So, we would hope and seek to do that, of course, with you and with staff in partnership. And I know that we're going to sort of talk about that in greater detail in terms of the advice and guidance that we're going to give. So I hope that sort of gives you a bit of a flavour. What I want to do though is bring in Councillor Donnelly, who's sort of the new cabinet member for the inclusive economy, who's sort of got responsibility on a day-to-day basis politically for some of these issues, and I'm sure he's got a few thoughts that he'd like to share too.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few. I mean, echo what you said. Worth reinforcing. Number one, we're waiting to see what happens regarding announcements around the 17th or 19th of July. The feeling, of course, around the place is that there's going to be a green light almost irrespective, because the government is now unwilling to disappoint certain key constituencies in its mind, and will be in the odd situation of opening up at the point where COVID cases are rising at the fastest point that they have in 2021. But we've lived through a few weird, anomalous and contradictory situations in the last 18 months or so, and I think we're not done with them. We're not done with them yet. Careful is, I think, the watchword. Gradual, insofar as we do bring people back to an office, and voluntary. I mean, I think those are our watchwords. I think we're going to see different arrangements service by service. It occurred to me that I'm sure school staff think it's hilarious, the notion that we're talking about what people are going to do at a point where they've been working flat out in the workplace for months. In fact, on and off in different circumstances for months, and pretty much at 100% for this academic year. So we have had trailblazers here who've been there engaging way ahead of the science, I think, a lot of the time, if we're honest with ourselves. So I think a further thank you to the school staff and to those members of our staff who, in the nature of their work, must engage more widely and directly with the general public and expose themselves, to more risk than the council can control within Percival House or within a council building. So we're not going to run pell-mell at this. It's a cliche to say things will never be the same, but they won't be the same. We know that some people, because they tell us, would like to work at least some of the time in the office for reasons of their own well-being, and we'll seek to accommodate those things. And we know that some people would like to work predominantly or entirely from home, and we'll do our best to accommodate those things. Although I suppose, to my own mind, I think it's worth flagging, in normal circumstances with home working, one would look to ensure that an individual had premises which were suitable for the purpose. I don't think there's any doubt we've kind of flexed that quite a lot because of the circumstances of COVID. I think there comes a point as a responsible employer, you've got to go back and look at that, because there are health and safety implications to working from home in unsuitable conditions. But all of those, they're minor caveats to, I guess, the careful, gradual, and voluntary as the three watchwords that we'll be moving forward with. I hope that makes it clear. Peter's frozen, I think.
He's on mute.
All right.
Sorry, I thought I'd come off of mute. I've got Sukminder and Mary indicating. I don't mind which way you go, but Sukminder, maybe as you ask the question, do you want to come in first or second?
I'm quite happy for Mary to make her points, and then I can come in after her if it's okay.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you both said is welcomed, and I think you've said it well and everything. But I do still think that the message of thanks and continuous thanks needs to go out again, and reassurances that people's views will be taken into account. I did a casework meeting this afternoon about flexible working with somebody who works in customer services, who, when 2 years ago we requested work from home as part of it, no, you can never work from home. You work in customer services, you have to be in the office all the time. Guess what? We have a pandemic, and they all had to go home, and they all had to work, and they all had to find a way to work, and they had to get through all those trials and tribulations. And then I go, now I've got somebody that's been told, you've got to request formally flexible working for for us to consider that you can still continue to collect your child from school. And I'm thinking, this just all sends the really wrong message, which I've said to that manager. I think that you're coming out of this in a completely different and bizarre way. This doesn't send the positive messages that you need. And that's for us still the worry that we're hearing that message. I know that, we've got Liz and Andrew on this call, and I know what they are saying, and I know what Paul is saying, but that doesn't filter right down to many of the people managers that we have. They've still got an obsession, but if they can't see people, they can't manage them effectively, and they must be skiving because you haven't logged in this morning and telephoned me to tell me you've started working, which is a real insult to people that they have to do that and things. And then and this whole bit about how do I know that you've done 7 hours work? Excuse me, you should know that and you should trust me. So there still has to be those bits come forward. So although we hear that positivity and we know that new way of working, we've got to get it more sorted, because I think there's elements of it not working well, and I think that we still need to do those bits to make it work so that recovery works well. There still needs to be, maybe it's also training these managers on how you manage people when you can't see them. You can still manage people just because you can't actually peer over their shoulder and check that they're working. And maybe we need to do that. I'm not saying that all, because it's not all of the managers, but there are some out there which really struggle. And that is the worry for staff, that the staff here are really scared about being forced to come back into the office when, one, they're not feeling safe, and two, they don't think it's necessary in all cases. In some cases it is, and some people do want to come back, and we need to do that whole bit about what's right for everybody. But there's still a lot of mixed messages out there, and we need to make sure that that works well.
Yeah, sorry, I put myself on mute again, and I did say sort of to go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to say something similar to what Mary said, which is your statements are very welcomed, and it would be better. And I suggest that you, Peter, perhaps consider, and would support you in doing this, in terms of putting out a communication to all staff which confirms what you've just said today, which you and Steve have said today, in terms of the slow, cautious, careful, gradual and voluntary return back to work. Because what I'm concerned about is that we may have some rogue managers or directors or ADs who may all of a sudden want to start to bring everyone back to work straight away because of the government announcements that we're dreading. And so I think it's important that you put out a statement to that effect, and also about a statement about flexibility, about support for the staff, and that managers will be flexible. And I think that clear statement and that instruction needs to go out across the council.
Danny?
Thanks very much. I wanted to say, firstly, on Councillor Donnelly's points relating to schools, thank you for that on behalf of our members. That's pleasing to hear that, as you know, lots of people sort of assume that schools have been closed for long periods of time over the past 15 months, which hasn't been the case. So that's really welcome, and also to encourage, as a council, us to always, when we're addressing schools, talk about school staff rather than just teachers, because we're all working, lots of us in education, in the education profession, not just teaching staff. So thank you for that. I also thought that Sukhminder made a good point about communications to staff, and I think maybe in a future agenda item in this meeting we might discuss a way that you as the new leadership can can communicate yourselves to schools to help encourage sort of positive trade union employer relations as we've had previously, and to ensure that we can make sure that schools don't feel isolated or separate from the local authority, although we know obviously they're different buildings, but the majority of our schools and school staff are under those Ealing contracts and should be part of that Ealing family. Thank you.
Yeah, and and thank you all. And sort of, one of the things that I'm sort of really keen on doing, and I hope sort of people saw the spirit of that in the video that I did sort of as the new leader to staff when we sort of when we formed the new administration, which was actually to sort of talk directly to staff and also listen to staff. I mean, I know it's difficult to listen to staff in the context of this particular scenario, and I think I sort of said in that video that I was looking forward to the point at which we can sort of get back together and even just have sort of the meanwhile conversations of passing each other in the corridor and not being strangers to each other. And we probably need to think about a way that we do that sort of under the conditions that we've got now. But sort of I'm all up for making sure that staff are really clear about sort of both the political and organisational agenda of the administration, but also sort of being able to interact directly with us. And sort of one of the things that we're trying to do as a new cabinet team is also make sure that we are engaging directly with sort of frontline staff and services, and actually sort of getting really under the skin of what it's like to be sort of on the front line of a lot of our council services. I just think we can experience them much better, and given sort of quite a number of the cabinet are new to cabinet, I think it will also be a good experience for them. So, if that is something that we can do and you think that that would be appreciated by staff, and if you think that that would help deliver the message better, then I'm sort of all up for making sure that we communicate sort of the new working arrangements. And to be quite, one of the things that we will come to talk about in the next month around the new council plan is very much a big focus on jobs and employment. And as part of that conversation, we will be talking about sort of the way in which the world of work is changing, and it's migrating to people being much more locally grounded and flexible working. And if we're going to be talking about that and sort of celebrating the flexibility of work in sort of post-COVID era, then we've got to make sure that that's consistent internally too. So if you think that will help us land the message, I'd be very happy to do that. Councillor Donnelly.
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, because language is very important in this, and everybody involved has got to make sure they use the right vocabulary. And when we're talking to people, we want to make clear to them that we understand they're already at work. What we're talking about, what we'll be talking about to them is whether, when, and how they come back to the office, not whether they come back to work. Which is easy to slip into. Even Sukminder, accidentally said back to work rather than back to the office. And it's so easily done. But I can easily see if a manager uses that phrase, an individual may well be spooked by that. So I think we just have to be careful that we make clear that we absolutely accept that everybody's already at work, and managers do need to understand how to manage people who are in a different building or not in a council office at all. And I think the people we employ to manage are capable of doing that and should certainly be doing that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Steve, I did say right at the beginning, maybe I missed out a word, but I did say that we've been all doing a sterling job, those that have been working from home and those that have been out on the front line, and hats off to everyone. So, we were all working, and I think when I said the context of work, I meant the workplace, obviously, which is a traditional office-based scenario or office locations, because not every place is an office, is it? And not every workplace is an office either.
No, completely. And I'm only teasing.
Yeah, well, you're good at pulling legs there, Steve.
So I don't see any more hands on this bit of your agenda. So, someone, are you going to take us on to the next bit?
Yeah, if I could. And this is to get and to tease out from you where we are in terms of the structural review, how we see things going forward in terms of the structure of a council. That's one element of it. Would also like to get some a briefing from you in terms of your understanding of the council budget, knowing full well we've got a meeting with Ross Brown next week to get some more details upon that. In terms of a separate issue here is about the savings and the reorganisations and the corporate consultation, which kicked off today. And I've got to say, we are frustrated and quite demoralised that we're going ahead, the council's going ahead and doing a reorganisation with the play service and putting at risk quite a few low-paid officers who are working 10, 8 hours per week, who have probably got a number of multiple jobs, and they have these multiple jobs in order to exist and live in London. And I'm very dismayed that we're actually putting people at risk, and a number of these people, if the proposals go ahead, are going to be made redundant. And we're throwing people on the scrap heap here, and we shouldn't be. And we've got a moral duty to individuals in this authority, people that work for this authority as well. And I'd like you to reassess the situation, review the situation, and see if we can't resolve this situation. So you've got my 3 elements there, so I'll let you respond.
If it's okay, what we'll do is we'll do it in that order. So I'll sort of speak a little bit about the overall picture. Councillor Donnelly, if you're happy to sort of pick up the budget points in terms of where we are, and perhaps I think we've got an MTFS sort of paper coming up at Cabinet that I think we've had some of our discussions about already. And then Liz, perhaps if I bring you in on the specifics of the play service consultation. And I think it's really interesting, actually, leaving the previous discussion around about sort of workplace versus work. One of the things that the new administration is seeking to do, and we're doing it in the council plan refresh that's coming forward next month, is to sort of really look at that issue of accountability. And now, of course, we are a public body, and as politicians, we're accountable to the electorate, and also our sort of our statutory duties and our non-statutory duties that we run. Sort of the theme of accountability is not one in which I don't think people work are held to account in the way that we're describing, i.e. you have to be at your desk to be accountable. But the point about accountability for the organisation is one in which we have a clear set of objectives, political and organisational, that we seek to achieve. And we seek to achieve that on the basis of the administration's manifesto, the council plan that sets out our priorities and the things that we want to deliver for the people of the borough. And therefore, I think what the administration's sort of looking to do is just spend a very brief period of time thinking about strategically if the organisation has the right culture, the right approach, and sort of the right capacity to be able to sort of make the change for the borough. We'll spend a bit of time doing that, I think, before the end of the summer, just to sort of give ourselves confidence that the things that we want to seek to achieve in the council plan are achievable, and that we've, as I say, we've got the right skill set and sort of the right culture as an organisation to be able to do that. We will want to have a conversation with trade unions and with staff and with sort of the cabinet and the political leadership to sort of be able to make sure that we've got a good understanding about what that looks like. And that's a short, sharp exercise. It's nothing. And then, from that exercise, we'll sort of think about anything that we might want to do after that. Happy to sort of go into sort of Q&A on that. Steve, do you want to sort of talk about the budget position and where we think that we'll be?
Yeah, well, yeah, just put my wet finger in the air for a moment. I mean, I think what I'm about to say will be awfully familiar to you from previous years. We're in a situation where, based upon what we know, and what we know is very incomplete, the the likely position for 22-23 is not promising. But we haven't yet had autumn statement. We're still in a position of being obliged to put forward a medium-term strategy in the absence of any medium-term information about our income. But speculating on the basis of what has happened in recent years, we're not expecting our position to be a good one. Now I'll let Ross talk you through, some of the details. There's a paper going to cabinet, still next month for the next few hours. So I won't quote any numbers that are in that, but it's not great. It may well be that things will be slightly less bad than our current projections, but we don't know how much less bad, and we don't know when we'll know how much less bad, because we cannot have any sense of certainty about what information is going to come to us and what money is going to be associated with that information. We have, at least in theory, on the current rules, exhausted our ability to raise a social care levy. So that option is gone unless the government changes its position, and we don't know what parameters will be put in place regarding potential increases in council tax. So I know I'm not painting a rosy picture. There's no particularly rosy picture to paint as things stand, but in the course of the autumn and into the new year, things will become clearer. How much better they'll become is a matter currently still of speculation.
And then Liz, did you want to sort of come in and on a specific issue of play service?
Of course. So this is about the integration of the play service into early years, and we acknowledged at corporate consultations today that we have put a number of staff at risk today, part-time lower paid workers at risk today, and with the help of the trade unions there's been a conversation about the fact that we are creating 8 posts as well, and not all those posts need to be full-time. And I think there's a piece of work to be done where we're looking to offer the current part-time workers who have been put at risk of redundancy, job shares or arrangements where we can cover those full-time posts with that group of staff should they wish to stay with us. So it's at the early stages today, but we'll be meeting weekly over the next 5 weeks. We have been successful in redeploying people, so hopefully the first option is the roles that are being created. But if those roles aren't suitable, we're going to look wider within the children's service and their directorate, and then we'll look wider in the council to try and accommodate those staff into other roles. So it's the start of a consultation, and in Ealing we truly do consult, and things do change as well during that process. So I think we just have to see, what the requirements of the staff are, what other jobs they have, where they might fit. I mean, it might be that some of them don't wish to continue with us anymore, but where they want to continue working, we will certainly be looking for opportunities for that to happen.
Minda and Mary, your hands went up right at the same time, so I'll let you decide again who goes first.
Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, we did have a productive conversation this morning around, how we're going to, or how the employer is going to deal with the issue of this group of staff who are at risk. But for me, it's a bit more about the actual strategic message that comes out and things like that. Because if you read that report, you read it through, that report is written about protecting the highest paid people within that service, and the lowest paid people, they were just going to be cast aside. And it's quite a frustration for us that 15 years into doing all of this, but we still are raising this same thing about the lower paid you are, the less control you have over what's going to happen to you, and you're it just feels like it's so easy to cast these groups of staff aside and things like that. And we just hope, and we won't give up. That's what we're here for. We will not give up fighting the battle for these people who have very little voice. And it feels today that, you know, like, to me, you know, there was nothing in that report that said that the full-time roles could be covered by part-time workers. They just said, we want full-time staff. And that sent a message to all of those staff. If we hadn't raised those concerns, that would have sent a message that part-time workers are not required in that bit of the service. That just sends out a really strange message. And it's those things that we ask time and time again. And obviously, you know, I'm not going to comment on the finance, because we all know we're in a dreadful state and we've got no money and we've still got to do all this service. And we know that there's going to be reorganisation after reorganisation. And but, you know, we have got to think about these people that are having this done to them are people, majority of them will be residents of your borough and things like that. They're council taxpayers. And if they haven't got one of their jobs, they're going to struggle to continue to be council taxpayers and things like that. And it's that whole economy thing, that about looking at that for me.
Amanda?
Thank you. Yeah, I fully agree with what Mary's just said. In terms of the structural review and the council, I hear what you say, and I do understand what you're saying. And I guess that also feeds into the budget and the budget implications, particularly as we know, we've got in the region of about 24 million pounds deficit going forward. It's about how that is going to be plugged, that hole, and it's a very large hole. And it's about working together in terms of any proposals or initiatives so that we can safeguard council services and jobs. And that's a bottom line for us. I won't say much more about the play service because I think Mary's covered it. It's really, there's going to be fallout. We've got to do our very best to ensure that people are not walking through the door and into hardship.
Yeah, and I think so in terms of sort of the assurance that I hope Liz has offered you and given you in terms of sort of the ability for us to look at full-time equivalents in terms of the staff that obviously continue to want to sort of stay with the council. I hope that gives you some assurance. You know, I'm sure it's a sort of a conversation you've had in these meetings well before sort of I've joined you for the first time, but you know, nobody in the administration sort of gets out of bed wanting to sort of make budget cuts, and certainly none of us became councillors in order to sort of manage the decline of public services. We are dealt with the cards that we are dealt on local government finance, which has us spend £4, 40% of what we had 11 years ago. And you know, again, sort of part of the reflection of the new council plan as we sort of bring it through next month is, you know, when we set out sort of the last council plan, we did it in the context of Brexit and sort of the unknown consequences that Brexit might bring. We talked about 11 years of austerity. We talked about sort of broken markets in the delivery of public services and a degree of profit taking that's taken by private companies delivering public services in the sort of the contracting arrangements that are so sort of common in the public service nowadays. And we talked about sort of the pressures of adult and children's social care ever increasing. We could never have foreseen a pandemic. I don't think we necessarily foresaw the extent to which inequality would sort of enter the sort of mainstream discourse that it has done, and it's probably a good thing that it has entered that mainstream discourse in the way that it has, because I think it's focused minds. I think what we would as an administration say and give you a reassurance is And I think you'll see it equally in the discussion again that we have around decent living incomes, and partly that's also reflected in the way that we've structured the cabinet in terms of it being objective focused, which is our priority is the lowest paid, right? And that's whether they're council employees or whether they are workers sort of out there in the public and private sectors within Ealing. And all that we do has to be focused on those for whom need our support the most. And those are the principles that we come to all of the decision making that we do within the authority, whether that's the budget process or whether that's on individual services. But that's always at the heart of the decisions that we do take. And we don't do any of this sort of lightly. And we do it with a clear sense of where that priority needs to be. And we will continue when it does come to services and reconfigurations to sort of use those principles that guide us in terms of the conversations that we do have with staff. Understanding and knowing that there are probably many, many more difficult conversations that we're going to need to have going forward, but we will always do that in that spirit. Danny?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make the point really that I think I speak for my union colleagues here when we say we know that nobody wants to be doing these things or cutting services or being those in charge at times like this, but we have heard that an awful lot, and it doesn't really do very much to help anybody really, because nobody wants to do it. We've been this in 10 years and our members are suffering, and the majority of our members within Unison here in Ealing will be low paid female workers, and they're the people that you in your new leadership are saying that you want to support, which is obviously very positive, and we're very pleased about that, and it's part of our job to sort of hold you to account on that and work with you on it. So I just thought I'd make that point, because I do appreciate that it's not what any council seems to want to do, yet it is happening, and maybe there needs to be a broader sort of campaign across local authorities as well to say enough is enough here. We won't keep doing this, because it will erode our communities until there's nothing left.
Yeah, and so we're really, we joined the LGA's campaign sort of breaking point sort of just before the pandemic hit, sort of try and make those points, which is there really isn't much further we can go, unless the government really wants to sort of rethink first principles about how services are delivered at a local, whether we express it as a Barnet graph of doom or whether we express it as the Ealing graph of doom, there comes a point at which all we will be left doing is statutory services if we go too much further, and that's not a position that anybody wants to be in at all. And as I say, you're right to say accountability cuts both ways, and we would want you to keep us accountable. That's absolutely right too. So, Minda, do you want to come in, and then I'll bring in Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to tease out a bit more in terms of the direction of this structural review, and also whether or not we'll have a process of delayering, because it has been spoken about a number of times by the Labour group that we must delayer and actually give responsibility to the people that deliver the service. There's a question mark over delayering, because what tends to happen is there's a bit of delayering in terms of heads of service or assistant director deletions, and lo and behold, in a few months' time or in a year's time, we see creations of these posts and more of these posts. So that's something to watch out for, and we'll certainly keep an eye out on this and inform you of when this is happening. And the second thing I'd like to say is that we as a council must end the internal markets that we've created, because each of the departments charge and recharge each other, and we're all here under the same umbrella providing council services. So why do we have internal markets charging cost codes, recharging? And it just seems as though, we're not a number of business units, we are one council. and we need to stop all of this nonsense because that's wastage.
Yeah, I'd say sort of point taken. You know what? These are issues and concerns. You know, these are issues and concerns that we are well aware of, and I think it's as we sort of look at particularly things like the strategic review, the fundamental sort of question that sits underneath that is, you know, what do we have the right culture as an organisation, and do we have the sort of skills and capacity that we need to be able to deliver on the things that we want to deliver on? And you know, in terms of sort of layering and internal markets, you know, these are questions that don't necessarily have answers to straight away, and they won't, because the administration's 5 weeks old now. But it's sort of ones that, you know, we are very much aware of. Councillor Johnson. You're on mute. You're mute.
To be noisy because I was doing things earlier. Just this is not directly on this, but just to, it's sort of related. Can Liz or Steve or someone tell me, or Minda, where the pay claim is? Because I know we employees were offered 1.5 and we will do what everybody else does. But could someone tell me where we are on that at the moment? The most recent information?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, go for it, man.
I'm an NJC representative for London. So
Tell them it's 15%.
I think I know what the current situation is. So the pay claim has been by Unison, GMB and Unite has been rejected, and we've written to the Unison, the joint unions have written to the LGA to ask them to join in a campaign that we, both the trade unions and the employers, go to the government for an increased settlement for local authorities to improve the pay offer and things like that. So I suspect it is going to be some time and things like that. I don't know, actually. I've never asked the question in Ealing how much you've actually put aside for the pay award, and what have you put aside, and what did you think, and possibly what do you think? Do you think that we should get more than 1.5%? You know, that'd be interesting.
Thank Mary. I did know it was rejected. I just didn't know where we were on the spectrum at the moment. But I dare say it might be. We'll find out much later on. But I'll leave Steve or Peter to answer the other question.
And I'll say Steve, because I think I'm not sure. It's the short answer. But Steve's probably had more conversations about budget planning at this point than me.
Well, Liz will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a provision is made. I can't remember, but given that the actual settlements have been, I shall put it, sort of consistent in their moderation over recent years, it's not that difficult to project a likely outcome. Is that a diplomatic enough answer?
I think so. Mary, your hand's come down, so Danny.
Thanks. I just wanted to make the point that we raised this actually 2 weeks ago at our local authority trade union meeting for children and adults and schools. And I got the information from one of the assistant directors that most schools have budgeted 1.5%. And I'm a little bit concerned that that's too low. I know that schools may not be wanting to budget even that much, but if we've just rejected 1.5%, and there seems to be an appetite for all of us as a group of unions pushing this as far as we can to get what our members deserve, then I think schools need to be budgeted more. And it might be useful, actually, Liz, if you're able to shed any more light on what corporately has been budgeted as well, just because we want to get the highest pay increase that we can, but we also want you as the employer to be in a position to know what you need to spend and what you need to allocate as well, so that it can work smoothly.
Shall I come in there then? I'm not certain, to be quite honest, exactly what Ealing has put aside, but what I can tell you was there's a survey done of all the London councils in the lead up to this, and all the London councils, almost without exception, have budgeted for less than 2%, and most of the councils have budgeted for 1.5%, and that's information I think that came out of the finance group across London. So I can't for definite say tonight what Ealing's done. I haven't got access to that information, but most of the authorities, and I would imagine Ealing will be in that pack of most authorities. It was 1.5%, and I think a few possibly have put aside 2%, and some weren't prepared to share the information at that time.
I don't see any more hands on this one. Unless there's a follow-up. Minda, do you want to take us to the next?
Might be.
Oh, yeah, Danny, I didn't see you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I got confused easily. I get easily confused. I put my real hand up instead of the pretend one. Sorry.
No, that was me looking at the sidebar thing, or something went.
I know.
That's
very rejected now. No. Right. I was just going to say that, Mary, you might be able to clarify this, but I'm pretty sure that our pay claim also includes the proviso, the very important proviso, that we are asking the government centrally to fund this pay increase, because we know what the pressure is on schools and local authorities, and we don't want to put our members more at risk by taking away from that pot. So I think our pay claim is asking for it to be fully funded by central government as well.
Which is very welcome.
Indeed. So on that note, perhaps do we want to then move on to consultants, interims and agency staff?
Yeah, Peter, can I suggest that we take it in conjunction with the report, and if we let the officers talk us through the report, and then we can come back to observations and comments on that report.
Yeah, my understanding also is that you've got a table, I think, that was probably requested at the last meeting. So Liz, Andrew, over to you.
Andrew, do you want to talk through the headlines?
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, we did discuss this at the last meeting, and the committee did ask us to come back with more detailed information, and that is what we've done in this report. So you've got an appendix, which is anonymized appendix, obviously, because it's a public document, of the 113 interims, consultants and agency workers engaged outside the agency worker contract that we have with Adecco. You asked at the last meeting for the spend on those people, or that group of people, and the spend in 2020 to 21 was circa 2.695 million. And as of March 2021, there were 495 Adecco agency workers, costing just over £2 million per month. Based on that figure monthly, the annual spend is 29.967 million. The overall numbers, therefore, are 608, and the overall cost is 32.662 million. So that's addressing the points that the committee raised last time. We are doing further work with service colleagues, supported by ourselves in HR and finance, to undertake further data cleansing on this information and to refine the future reporting. And non-standard workers and agency workers will be reviewed as part of the future Ealing savings for 2022-23. The scope of this work is to be worked out. Thank you.
Go for it.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Andrew, and I'm grateful, and I'm glad that you've provided the details in the tables. But this is just phenomenal, you know, and we say this. I'm gobsmacked at the figures here, the cost, and what I'd like to do is, Peter, from you to get your your reaction and your colleagues' reaction on these figures, because I'm just I'm flabbergasted at the enormous cost that we've got. We've spoken about play workers, grade 4 play workers being made redundant on one side, and quite a few of them on restricted hours, and we see this kind of cost going on, and we're thinking to ourselves, we're scratching our heads thinking, what's going on here? And we've already also separately spoken about the budget and how we think that we're going to have a very dire time going forward into the next financial year. But we look at this spend on a monthly basis and on a yearly basis, it just doesn't tally. So, guys, what's your reaction to this, and what are you going to do as a council?
And Mary, and I'll have to come in, but Mary, do you want to speak?
Sorry. Yeah, just almost identical point really that Sukhinder has just made. How are you defending? I don't know what the reduction, how much that saving of deleting 8 play leaders is, but it's nowhere near £32 million. And how can you say that it's okay to spend £32 million on temporary staff? And we can't hide behind what's been hidden behind before. Oh, some of these temporary staff are listed that way because they're the music teachers in schools. Well, we haven't used music teachers in schools for the last 15 months. There hasn't been any. So, you can't hide behind all of those things. And how it's got to be wrong. £32 million on temporary staff and things like that. And then you want to delete 8 part-time, low-paid play leaders. And how, I hope that these play leaders come and ask you that question directly. How do you sleep when you know that £29 million is spent on agency and nearly £3 million spent on interims, which we've always asked, what value for money do they bring? What do they bring? What don't they bring? Can you demonstrate? Some of them have been here for years. Can you demonstrate actually what value they've demonstrated, why they're here? Some of them don't want permanent contracts. Why do they not want permanent contracts? We shouldn't have them here. We have to deal with this. It's just wrong. And it's just so wrong.
So I think I'll say a few things. In an ideal situation, we wouldn't need to use agency staff, and partly this is about the labour market and conditions in the labour market and the regulation of the labour market than it is the situation that we find ourselves in. And sort of, Sukhinder, I sort of recall the conversation that we had in regards to sort of planners, right? And partly this is also about the way in which we have seen a shift towards contractualism over a significant period of time, insofar as 30 years ago, 90% of town planners were employed directly by local authorities, and it's now precisely the opposite. It's 60% are employed in the private sector and 40% are employed in the public sector, and that probably tells you something about how those services are delivered, quite often by contractual arrangements where people are able to achieve high rates of pay in the private sector than they are in the public. And whilst we've got the capped pressure on our ability to pay, we're always going to see, to some extent, the market and the labour market responding to that situation. So there is absolutely a piece of work that I know gets done by sort of the West London Alliance, but also London councils, around the way in which we're able to sort of better regulate the labour market in and around these areas, and using strategic procurement on a greater scale through things like the WLA to sort of really put the brakes on the race to the bottom on ever increasing sort of competition in the labour market. So if there's an agency worker doing work, it's because the work needs to be done, and I certainly don't think it's a zero-sum game of it being a situation where agency work isn't in any way different to the work that's being done by staff who are directly employed. the question is, how do we reduce our exposure to agency contracts and agency workers and get people into permanent work or permanent contracts? And that's certainly, that is the preferred situation. I'm nervous about particularly around interims that have been with the council for a significant period of time. I think that probably speaks more to contractual arrangements than it necessarily does the work that needs to be achieved or the things that we do. And that's a conversation internally that we have already had in a number of situations and a number of scenarios to make sure that sort of our interim arrangements are robust. And as I say, these are ongoing conversations that the new administration is having internally, sort of after the first few weeks of, if you like, sort of deciding what our priorities are. So those are some initial thoughts. Steve, did you want to maybe come in at this point too?
Well, I should reinforce those. I mean, I guess as an old trade unionist, I start to say that these are workers too. And, nobody, I think, in the room is criticising individuals for taking up opportunities that we're offering to them. The question is, are we making the right offers of the right roles in the right places at the right times? And I'm sure the answer to that is sometimes we're not. But that would be true of any organisation with which I've ever had dealings. I think as things stand, we do want to review the way in which non-standard and agency workers are used as part of our way ahead. A lot of that begins, as you know, with scoping what we have and how we got to where we are. As Peter says, there are hardly going to be many cases where there's no purpose to the agency work having been there. The question is, what circumstances brought about the use of an agency worker? And are we managing those circumstances correctly? And if we're not managing those circumstances correctly, can we manage them in a way which enables us to have a council employed in-house person? So I don't want to make promises about numbers. I think I'll be amazed if we can't do better than this. I'll be amazed if we can move to a world in which there are no interim agency and non-standard workers in terms of the council's payroll, because it's too dynamic, too fluid, too unpredictable a world, and we have services we need to provide absolutely today in response to short notice crisis. Would we as an administration prefer to see the balance move as far as it can towards employing our own people, because we get better loyalty in those situations, because we would believe we get better value for money in those situations, and because the people with those roles would feel more valued and feel part of a proper career structure? All of those things, yes.
So Sukhminder and then Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to, as an aside, we've spoken about the play leaders, and I've got to say that the majority of those people are black. So I'm just, it's a question mark of where's this fit in with your equalities agenda, and we'll save that for one of the items. But I agree with you, Steve. They are workers. Yes, we do. We acknowledge they are workers, and I acknowledge that we may never be in a situation where we don't have interims or consultants or an element of agency staff, but we could crack this nut straight away by doing that review. And I've got to say, Steve, we've been waiting for this review for a number of years. So, I'm not holding my breath now, but I want to see real change. We should already start off by offering contracts to individuals, which are interim contracts or temporary contracts or whatever it may be. There's got to be some contractual basis which allows people to have some certainty. But not only that, which also allows them to be part of a pension scheme, and that will bolster our pension scheme as well. So, you know, there's a lot of win-wins that we can get out of this. I guess we need to really, we've spoken about this so many times over the years, but we've not seen any movement. I think the problem is that agency staff in the past were appointed by individual teams and directors before we had the Adecco system and before we have the close monitoring which is taking place at present. But we still have to live with the legacy and the history of what's taken place, but we haven't addressed that legacy or history. The whole point here is we're seeing interims and consultants coming in and they're earning shed loads of money, and we're thinking, well, hold on, why can't we have this service or this expertise in-house? Why can't we grow our own as well? So we need to be more imaginative and, then when we have a situation, we think, right, how do we crack this? Let's pick up the phone and call up a headhunter or something like that, and let's just give them an open checkbook there.
Yvonne, Councillor Johnson, sorry.
I'm on mute. I'm unmuting myself. Just to say, you were right, Peter, when you said at the very beginning that some of those jobs really do need to be done, because there is a shortage of permanent social workers in London, and that's a big issue. And they really don't want permanent jobs because they're moving through and they like being temporary. And I've talked about this to officers, and it's not ideal, but it's not just us. And we do need those bodies in place because we don't want there to be harm to children or adults. So that's one side. I won't talk about all of them, but one thing I think we've talked about a couple of years ago, I see we've got 4 people who are self-employed, and I thought we were going to get rid of people like that because they're doing it for tax dodge, and so I'd be a bit concerned about that. So I know Liz has tried very hard, and Andrew, to go back to various individual departments and managers, but I was worried to see those, I think there's 4 of them, self-employed, and I really thought we got rid of that, but maybe Liz would like to comment on that.
If I may, there's anyone that's self-employed, we have a process because of IR35 now where we check whether they come in scope for paying tax at source, even if they're self-employed. And there are some that are on statement of works which can genuinely go through their limited company. So we do have a process for this. Perhaps I might just also comment that I think we've seen a few of the agency workers now more generally are looking to take permanent roles. So our processes and our policy is to try wherever possible to offer jobs internally first. Agency workers and interim people can apply alongside permanent workers when we advertise the jobs internally. We don't always get a massive take up from the agency workers. I mean, we've tried quite hard, but I think there's a number of workers, including a couple in my own area, agency workers, who have been with us for a while. And I think the uncertainty of the sort of COVID situation has made quite a few people think again about whether they should be taking a permanent job with a better, reliable pension scheme in the local authority. So I think we might see some movement. And I think actually it's about how we promote, particularly to that agency workforce, the benefits of working for us as a permanent member of staff, because if you've had them 3-4 years, obviously we must be satisfied with the work they're doing for us. So we just need to persuade them, why they should apply for the permanent roles, because those permanent roles are there in most cases.
Okay, any more on this?
Peter, sorry, it's just that I think we need to really get a big grip on this now, and I'm sure Steve will, because I think we need to hold managers accountable about this spend in their own areas, and I'm sure Steve will, because I think too often in the past managers have been let off the hook, but they need to now really be accountable and give a good justification of why this situation continues in their sections and their departments.
Yeah, and I think what we're saying is that this is certainly an issue that we. Oh, Kemi, do you want to come in?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself.
No,
Yeah,
don't
hi,
worry.
yeah. So yeah, I agree with most of what everyone is saying, but I mean, it's just like Sukuminda said, and Mary said, it's been going on for quite a long time, and we've sat here before, not with you, and we've heard the same thing, and it's just really now something really needs to be done. Someone needs to be held accountable, or more than one person needs to be accountable, or somebody needs to be in charge to make sure something is really done. I mean, we're talking about people in post for 3, 4, 5 years, and then we're also talking about staff that need development, that want to be developed, and these people could have trained them up to be in that post, and yet, so we all of that need to be looked at, because we keep saying, oh, we don't have the staff or the skills, or the staff haven't got the skills, but there's a lot of staff there that would like to, be developed to get to that stage. And I don't see why, they can't be trained into those posts. That's it, really.
Is that another hand up, Sukuminda, or is that a clap? Or is it a wave? I can't tell.
That was a clap, because I fully support what Kemi's saying about growing our own. Let's train our people up, people that are committed to the council, to council services, not people that are here for a short period of time. When it suits them, they leave, and we're left with another problem. Let's train up people. It's part of your equalities agenda as well, which is to provide opportunities in these difficult times as well. So it's, we've got to see this as a whole and a bigger picture.
Absolutely, and I think in terms of sort of both Steve, Yvonne, and Liz have sort of set out. I mean, that is the baseline position. The baseline position is, if we can get permanent employees to take permanent roles, that will absolutely be the priority. In terms of encouraging staff to take sort of positions in the organisation, I think that's also sort of key. And as Steve says, we will do that. There then comes a point, which is labour market forces prevent us from getting to the perfect, which is there is a huge shortage of social workers, and there is a huge shortage of planners, and there's a huge shortage of enforcement officers, right? And no matter how many times we can attempt to put internal candidates into post and we could train those people up, they have the ability to leave. And I was having a conversation with the Safeguarding Board only a few days ago for children's social care, and sort of discussing the challenges of social workers sort of leaving the council, and not for any reason than they have a really tough time dealing with the stuff that they deal with, and then sort of 6 months later, sort of having some of those same people who formerly were with the organisation return as agency workers, because of the sort of the market forces and the ability that they know that they can move from council to council on at a high rate, because their skills are in such short supply. And we as an authority can do work to train those people up and to sort of invest in people's careers, and they've got the ability to sort of take that investment and passport it around whatever public body that they have. And it sort of pains me that perhaps we can't hold on to staff longer and train them up and keep them with us, but people will sort of go where there's opportunity. But I think what we're saying is, we absolutely know that these are issues that we need to look at. The ideal is never to be in a situation where we are expending significant sums of money either on agencies or interims. We're certainly giving a commitment on perhaps revisiting issues around long-term members of our sort of staff who have been on interim contracts for significant periods of time. I think what we're saying is we're definitely going to look at that. But sort of hope that's giving you at least a bit of reassurance and confidence in what we're trying to achieve. Mary?
All of that is good. I think that what needs to happen is that we need to develop that. We've been again on and on and on about grow our own, and I do think that they've really moved noticeably in children's services, because we've got a considerable amount of apprentice social workers, and that's really good and everything. And I think that's a really good move that we've now gone to. And, you know, we're going through this reorganisation of where, rightly so, which we said 5 years ago, that you were going to put too much pressure on the unqualified staff, which were the family support workers, and rightly so, Ofsted discovered that and said it is not acceptable for them to have casework loads that they were holding, and you have to make them social work posts, and they have to be social work posts to hold those cases. So it's great that you've done all that work, you've acknowledged it and set it. But what about all the other departments? And we need other departments. You know, we've had agency housing benefit officers for 20 years. And for 20 years, I have been raising, why do we not have a training programme for housing benefit officers? And I'm told, well, we won't bother doing anything like that because we're going to have universal credit and we're going to lose all these staff. And why would we do that? So we all come up with endless excuses for why we don't train people. But we do good examples. So I won't say that we don't, because I'm sure Liz will comment on that they did a very good job recently when they closed the CAF in, you know, the cafeteria in Percival House, and they got all of those staff, apart from one who chose to leave, into other posts. Now, you wouldn't have seen immediately that they had transferable skills, but people actually did the proper job of redeployment and actually go, what can you learn to do? What can you learn in a pretty short period of time, and how can we skill you up? But not enough of that gets done. My real fear is that, you know, we've used these 8 play leaders, is that we won't specially put somebody there and to spend the time that you need to spend with people to give them the confidence that if they go for jobs, we will give you the training to get you up, to skill you up into that right way. And I don't believe that we're going to put that much work into it. And that's our fear, is that we don't spend enough time. We haven't done grow our own in any true way for years, and that's half of the problem. So, you know, Kemi commented on it, you know, every manager post, why is it not an acting up? Well, no, you know, we don't want people acting up. We'd rather have somebody from the outside in and things like that. And that we need to move from that. So hopefully, I know we're all sounding like we're just moaning completely, but I think it's our frustration that we've had the same conversations for years and years and years, and we don't see the progress of people actually doing something about it.
I mean, Liz, you know, issues here of the sort of the specifics of the play worker scenario, and I think, you know, Mary's talked a little bit about sort of what that sort of redeployment process looks like. I mean, is there anything here you want to comment in terms of sort of that process for that cohort of staff?
Yeah, for that cohort of staff, I mean, we spoke today at a consultation that we'll certainly give them, you know, support in terms of coaching them. They'll get an individual who looks after them in terms of if they're not going to stay within that service, you know, helping them to get another role basically out. And that's what members of our team do. It is resource intensive, and I think, you know, I think probably one of the challenges we've had in some of this space is perhaps resources, not just from our perspective, maybe, you know, in terms of the services focusing on some of this. So it's probably something we need to think about as part of our strategic review. What is it we actually do? What do we invest in, and, you know, as a priority? So I'm fairly confident, you know, that we'll support that group of staff as we did the cafe staff, because that's something that the director and I spoke about at the very beginning of that consultation, about how are we going to find other jobs for these people. But I think it's about mindset as well, because the director in that case was, you know, I've got agency staff in other roles that I think these people can be trained up to do. So it's a mindset as well, and it's making sure that senior managers and middle managers have that mindset that makes it possible. We've also put in place since autumn of last year a process, not a very popular process, where my team and the business partners such as Andrew and colleagues review all the agency and permanent worker roles that managers want to send out, and we ask lots of difficult questions. You know, for the agency workers, are we sure this couldn't be an acting up or a secondment or an internal opportunity? And for the permanent roles that are going out, our first question is, have you advertised this internally? Have you thought about acting up? Have you thought about secondments? So that's something we introduced in the autumn of last year, which is getting some results, because we are getting some people that say, oh yes, I haven't done that yet and I now need to advertise it. And I think we just need to encourage people more when we do the advertising internally and the acting's up to participate in that process. So I think there's a number of things we can do.
Kemi? Yeah, Kemi, go ahead. I think you were off mute, and now you're off.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to ask a quick question. I think it might be Liz that will be able to answer this question. We've been going on about, temporary staff. They don't want to go for permanent staff. In where I work, we have a number of temporary staff, and they would love to go for permanent staff. Some of them have discussed with me in my role as a union, but they've not been offered. So, what's the process? How do they go about it?
So, Kemi, I think that's definitely a conversation we need to have sooner rather than later outside this meeting about who is this group of staff, so we can talk to the managers about advertising those roles internally so they can apply for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any more sort of comments or questions on this item?
Can I just say,
Yeah,
sorry, Peter, I was just going to say that there is a meeting with the director tomorrow, and we'll raise this issue about the agency staff and the post being available, and can they please be facilitated to apply for those posts? And it'd be helpful if you were to keep an eye on it, because we don't want to be here again in a few months' time raising the same issue.
And that's in housing, by the way.
Yeah. So I think what hopefully you're hearing is, yes, that's the baseline principle, right? That's what we fundamentally want to do. And I think what Liz is sort of, I hope, giving you an assurance that where we do have situations like we have, that absolutely the first principle is about making sure that staff have the ability to go to new roles internally. And if that involves investment in sort of training and development, that absolutely should be the case. It's not happening, of course, we want to know about it, we want to hear about it. And certainly, I'm fairly certain that this is probably going to continue to be a theme that we return to, not least because you will rightly hold us accountable for any level of agency spend and any level of interim appointments. So, it should, so the conversation will always continue, and hopefully you will always keep us accountable for the scale of that and the overall scheme of our staff complement. But yeah, definitely. Did you want to come back in?
Yes, please. It's I don't want to go over the territory we've gone over already, but it's the issue about recruitment freeze and the spend freeze. It's because we've been very supportive of monitoring that process of recruitment, not just happening for the sake of it, but it should be monitored. And we wanted a centralized system where it's accountable. And we believe one is in place now, Liz, am I right?
Liz?
Yes, you're correct in that. So all agency assignments come through us, and all the permanent stuff doesn't go out to recruit until the business partners and I are satisfied that, we've looked at alternatives before we go external. We've also, I think you're aware, we've agreed that the interim consultant process will initially come to Ross and myself, Chief Finance Officer myself, to review. And over a certain level, then we'll be asking cabinet members to sign those off as well. So I think you can be reassured that any additional interims and consultants, non-standard workers that come through that process will be robustly reviewed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That do you want to take us on to working from home guidance? Are you happy to move on?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And this really encapsulates many of the issues we've spoken about of recovery, people coming back to workplaces, etc. I think it's fair to say that we all agree that we're looking in the future of having a more hybrid system of working. Some people working from home, some people having touchdown off spaces, etc. But at this present juncture, we are where we are. We're really acute that there's a situation within Percival House, whether or not that gets redeveloped, the plans to decant, etc., and the potential loss of that large office space. So I think what we've had is the pandemic, the emergency, people being advised to work from home, and they've really come up trumps by doing that. But where we're moving to is that we need to refresh and review our working from home guidance and a number of levels in terms of health and safety, flexibility, flexible working, being allowed to drop off your kids in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon from schools, that whole flexibility, family friendly approach. We've also got to table into this people that are obviously doing additional hours. So it's about flexi and toil that you can, if you've got prior approval, you can accrue these kinds of things. And we need to refresh our basic guidance, is what I'm saying.
Well, reflecting on that, I think we've probably gone over earlier on sort of our view on sort of some of the dynamics on this in terms of, and I think it's really key that we've got to sort of extend that flexibility, but sort of be confident that when we do extend that flexibility, that we don't sort of invariably end up sort of going full circle and returning into a sort of punch in, punch out culture. That's definitely not where we need to be. No. So I think that's really, really key in this. Steve, I see that your hand's up, but Liz, I'm sure you will want to sort of come in on this as well.
Yeah, or to say it was just around the Percival House point. It's hard to say the phrase "one of the benefits of COVID" doesn't ring very well, but I guess one of the benefits of the experience we've had is that I think it's made the prospect of a Percival House redevelopment decant much less scary than it was. I think, so that's all we need to do almost. I mean, there is a difference. There is a difference in the sense that, the provision of certain services en masse would have to migrate. So the base of those services would have to migrate, and we have to manage that process to ensure that they're in suitable places as well, and the right people are able to be in place there. But surely we must now see this as doable. We're not yet absolutely sure how we'll do it all, but our confidence that it can be done, I think pretty much across the organisation, must be greater than it would have been 12 months ago, when we'd have looked at it, sort of biting our fingernails a little bit. So yeah, we've got to be careful. We can't be complacent, and we've got to make sure that we give the right support to the right people in the right way.
And I'll give myself the privilege to sort of come back in here again. And it's also sort of like recognizing what the future of the office environment does look like, right? Who amongst us hasn't already had a conversation about sort of what being in an office will look like in the future? And actually, if we're pretty convinced that being sort of together with your team or extended team is going to be forever more hybrid, then sort of actually, office layouts and breakout space and meeting rooms and meanwhile areas, they mean something now in a really different way than they would have done previously. So I think we've got to think about all of that in the long term too, about sort of how we use we use space in the future too. So, Minda, I know your hands up. Do you want to come back in now, or would it be useful for Liz to set out how we're taking some of this forward?
Well, I was going to try and curtail this item by saying that it's a great opportunity not only for those that want to have working from home or a hybrid situation. It benefits individuals, their well-being and their family life and their commitments. They might have dependents that they look after as well, but I'm not saying that they're looking after their kids whilst they're working, so don't get me wrong here, just in case Steve wants to pull my leg again. But what I'm saying, it's a great opportunity to build upon where we are now, and it also is beneficial to the council as well. And I'm sure that, I know Liz is away next week, but we should program in, I think we've agreed this, to sit down and discuss guidance at this present juncture, because as we all know, guidance is only fit for purpose for a particular period of time, then gets obsolete and needs to be reviewed again. So, I'm just trying to curtail this item.
No worries at all. I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Do you want to then canter through the next bits in terms of what's sort of a priority for you? Staff survey?
Okay, yeah, sorry. This is staff survey was done some time ago. We've asked for a number of times, and we've kept this on the agenda. A council-wide staff survey was undertaken, but I don't ever recall seeing action plans from departments of what they're going to do to react to the survey in terms of all of some of the negativity. There's been nothing I've seen about departments reflecting upon what's in the survey and what they intend to do to make things better or improve the situation. Admittedly, I admit straight away, we've been in a pandemic. It's been unprecedented times. We've got some information there which maybe we do need to refresh and to do another staff survey, because we are in different circumstances. But we seem to do surveys but not react to them, and then we go on to the next staff survey, and then it's just seems to be that we're going around a roundabout here without any direction.
Liz?
I know we've been very late in sharing and pulling together the historic action plans now from the last full staff survey, so we acknowledge that. I think one of the proposals is that we work together to do a full staff survey later this year. I think it's fair to say, though, that the wellbeing surveys that have been done with the workforce during the pandemic, that we have reacted and responded to what they're telling us in terms of support, and we've clearly laid out each time with one of those surveys what we've done since the last one. As you're aware, we've got a wellbeing survey out at the moment due to close on the 9th of July. And obviously when that one closes, it'd be interesting to see what the results are, which we've benchmarked against all the others, and share that conversation about what do we do next. Do we continue with wellbeing surveys, or do we move more into a wider survey in the autumn for the workforce? So very happy to have that conversation. I think we've got a well-established process now. One of the benefits of the technology and the changes in it during this period of time has been that it's very easy now for us to create these surveys and get them out to the workforce really quickly. We're not relying on other consultants or organisations to support us in this space now, so we can respond more quickly.
Kemi?
I was going to just mention something about the Percival House not being available, and the fact that staff are now working from home and everything. I think as Sukuminda said, that it's benefited some people, it's benefited me, I won't lie, because I've got little one, I've got medical. So but saying that, we need to be mindful, because there are people that are finding it difficult, and it's coming up more and more that more staff are now like, okay, they've had enough, they can't deal with it. So moving forward, there need to be things that will help them support. I don't know what you plan on doing, but something need to be taught around how to help them cope. You know, if it's a day to come to an office somewhere, I don't know, or I don't know, but I just needed to mention it, that there are staff and more staff now coming up and saying, listen, I'm struggling now. Before I was coping, but it's gone over 6 months, I'm struggling. So that's just for you to be aware. Then with what Liz said about the wellbeing survey and everything, I'm finding that when I ask staff to do it, you know, my colleagues and everybody that I know, I'm always sending reminders. I get feedback like, oh, but I said something in my questionnaire, but nothing was done. So I get that you said that a lot of action been put in place, but there's still staff that are coming back and saying they put something in their survey, you know, and yet nothing's happened. So I'm not sure how you can address that.
So if I respond, Kemi, so in terms of people putting comments, when we've got 900 responses, obviously we've been operating lots of different things that are not really HR related during the pandemic. And I think it's quite difficult to address all the individual issues. So what we've done is we've tried to look at what are the common themes coming out the survey. So we'll look at that with the survey results that come back, and maybe we just need to manage people's expectations that we won't always be able to address every individual need as part of the survey. So I acknowledge that, and I'll think about that one. In terms of returning to work, Kemi, if any staff are struggling and do want to get back into the office, I mean, we've had this within the HR community, so we've seen a number of people coming back in. There is a simple process: talk to your line manager, update your risk assessment, tell them that you need to come back in, I don't know, 1-2 days a week. The managers should all be aware there is a process for this. Everyone was trained in it. You know, it's a simple process. It's about having that conversation. And if staff have any barriers, they should, you know, managers telling them they can't come back in for a couple of days a week or what they want to do, then they need to raise that with the HR consultancy team, because, you know, well-being and making sure people connect on a social level. We know we have a lot of staff who live on their own. And, you know, or in difficult circumstances in terms of their workspace at home, and therefore, you know, it's a long time to stay at home and never return. So we're very comfortable. We can manage the numbers in such a way that, you know, people do need to come forward if they're struggling and want to come back a bit. It's good for them.
Thank you. But saying with the individual comment being made, is it possible to signpost those people to, you know, I don't know, is there a way to see how we can do it so that they know that their comment has been seen and, you know, kind of like...
I think, Kemi, because the survey is anonymous, we actually don't know who made the comment. But we can, in our feedback, say that we can explain to people what we've looked at and why, and say, you know, if they feel really strongly about something, give them some other avenues to approach dealing with that comment they've made. So we'll have a look at the comments this time and see what we can do with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more on this one? Also, do you want to take us to the next?
Okay. Can I let Danny do the scores item, please?
Thanks very much, Minda. Thanks, everybody. A few points and I'd like to raise under this agenda item, but two that are related to schools, but I'd like to under item 10, them general as well. So, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody who's been involved since the last time we had our Council and Trade Union joint meeting. All staff under the Ealing Schools contract are going to be earning a minimum of the real living wage, or the London living wage, of £10.85 an hour from the 1st of August. And, you know, we're very proud that we've been able to help that happen for our members. And just to give you some idea of that, that's 302 staff who are getting an increase of 22% per hour. So it's incredible. And the other 56 are still going to be getting that increase, and so we're really pleased that that was able to happen. And following our meeting with you, Councillor Mason and Councillor Costigan, we we were really encouraged by your commitment to bring that forward, and Councillor Donnelly, your role will be very important. So I'll discuss that a little bit more under item 10, but we're really pleased, and we see that as the first step, not as the end, but as the beginning. And I know our members are overjoyed, and it really is life-changing for them. Unfortunately, we have had a huge number of restructures in schools during the last term and a half. We've had 9 restructures in 9 different schools. We've talked a lot about the school redeployment list in the past. I think I raised it with you as the new leader, Peter, as well. And Liz, I was wondering if you might be able to give us an update, because I understand that might be ready to go now. So I don't know whether you would like to do that now, or shall I just finish the points I have and then?
Shall I do that briefly for you now, Danny?
Let's finish the points. If it's okay, Danny, let's finish the points.
Let's finish the points. Okay, let's carry on then. Right. So, yeah, that I'm sure won't take too long. I think what we would like from yourselves, I touched upon earlier as the new leadership, is a communication to schools, to the head teachers, but to school staff as well, to introduce what your ambitions are, because obviously corporately it's a lot easier for you to communicate with staff than it is to talk to the 5,000 staff who work in schools. But I think it's important. We want there to be no misunderstanding for schools that relations, and you want that to continue as well. So that would be very useful from our point of view. We've had some other points about parental contributions in schools. So we did raise this with Judith Finley, the Director for Children and Adults, but we understand that there are a number of schools in the borough who are asking parents to come up with monthly contributions because schools don't have enough money. And these are local authority schools, they're not academies, they're not free schools. We are obviously talking with Children and Adults Services, but I think it's important you know that. I don't know if you were aware, but obviously local authority education is paid for through taxes, and parents should not have to contribute each month. And I think some of the communications that came from one particular school were quite pressuring, and really we can't have that continuing, because that's not fair. That doesn't create a fair society. They are the particular points that I wanted to make under this item. So I appreciate your feedback on that, Liz, and Councillor Mason as well. Thank you.
So yeah, Liz, do you want to sort of come in on that point?
Thank you.
We'll cover that one, and I'll cover the other. I'll cover the others.
Great. So in terms of the redeployment for the school staff, the business partners and the head of schools consultancy, Mark, have worked closely together to develop the process for this. So we're ready and open to take requests for from school staff for redeployment. But when we spoke about this yesterday, we've had very few staff approach us, because the process is we need to have their contact details, and then we'll make sure they're either emailed or posted all the opportunities that come up. But we've had very little take up so far. But I do wonder if that's because of the timing of the school's restructures, and possibly the fact that I think perhaps people have only just recently been given notice of redundancy. So maybe that's a timing issue, but we're ready to do it. And interestingly, we've also had one of the schools another school had sent us a vacancy they had. We're also still trying to encourage the schools to do cross-school redeployment as well. So those conversations are ongoing, but we're ready and available to offer opportunities to the school's workforce, the support staff.
Thanks, Liz. If I could come in just quickly before you start speaking, Councillor. Obviously, just to clarify to everybody in the group here, that when we talk about school redeployment list from a Unison point of view, we understand that school staff should have access to the corporate redeployment list, but when we say school redeployment list, we want there to be a list of vacancies across schools that schools feed into, to ensure that, well, that these schools are doing all they can to make sure that people can have as many options as possible. So that's really useful to hear. There was one other point I missed, and I hope you don't mind me saying it now, but I raised it before, but at a previous meeting. But I wondered, in light of the footballer who collapsed on the pitch a few weeks ago, you'll probably all have heard about it, Christian Eriksen. We know that each Ealing school has a defibrillator, and I was hoping that we would be able to, as a council, to get that communication out to schools to encourage everybody within schools to know where that is, to know that they don't have to be scared of it. You don't have to be trained on how to use it. It gives you, you can't misuse it. It won't give you the shock if you don't need it. But I think that highlighted those few weeks ago how important these things and life-saving they can be. So I wondered, Liz, if you might be able to encourage maybe Mark to get a communication out to schools just as a reminder. Thank you.
We're encouraged both health and safety team that work with schools and Mark's team to on that point for you.
Thanks. So in terms of sort of the school meals contract, I think we're very happy to sort of be in the situation that I think we've now sort of landed in. Steve and I met with, Councillor Donnelly and I met with the campaign, and I think it's quite moving actually to hear directly from them about the real impact moving that contract onto London Living Wage has had. And they shared with us stories of dinner staff no longer needing to take a second job, no longer having to sort of work the length of the hours that they are, and sort of being able to do things that they haven't been able to do hitherto because of the income that they haven't had. And that was really quite moving, and I'm sort of super pleased. And there's a degree of internal learning that I think the new administration has taken on board. And partly that's about the governance arrangements of that school meal contract, not least effectively the cooperative model that currently exists, and the fact that the council provides the procurement service to that contracting model. And sort of we've made it very clear that the provision of London Living Wage will be a prerequisite for the council continuing to provide a strategic procurement vehicle for that coalition of schools in the future. And that will be, I hope, the fail-safe for the long-term decision that they will need to make in 2 years about how they're going to fund the London Living Wage for those staff moving forward. And you know, we've already, I think, spoken separately about some of the work that we're going to do around strategic procurement and social value policy, and what we actually put in our contract expectations, and making that very clear that that's always required, not just as a baseline on London Living Wage, but we also sort of use that as a tool to sort of better help regulate the labour market in terms of the contracts that we get control of. I think we're very aware, I'd say very aware of sort of issues relating to requests by schools to make for voluntary contributions by parents. And I'm very aware of the one that you referred to in particular, in terms of some of the communications that happened, that also I think referred directly to individual staff members and individual posts, which I thought was not good practice, and that is being watched very closely. You know, London has slightly less, but nevertheless a lower share of the dedicated schools grant in the last funding round than we did in previous rounds, and the same sort of financial pressures that have faced local authorities and public sector organisations, particularly during COVID, have also hit schools very, very hard too, and particularly schools that are providing additional services above and beyond what's funded by the dedicated school grant. Now, that doesn't make it right in terms of requesting funds directly from parents, doesn't make it right at all. And in an ideal world, we would never be in that situation. But it's something that, as I say, we are watching very closely, but also engaging with schools very directly through the Ealing Learning Partnership to sort of really understand and get to the bottom of why this is happening. But, you know, again, you're right. The first principle, these are maintained schools, and we should never be putting parents in a situation where there's even a direct or even an implied expectation that they're making a financial contribution. because of course what it will invariably mean is the schools that have a catchment area that is, let's call it what it is. You know, if those schools are in, if those schools are in well-to-do parts of the borough, they'll be able to raise that money. And if those schools perhaps are not in well-to-do areas, they won't. And that sort of just exacerbates inequality and doesn't do anything to resolve it. So as I say, we're watching it very closely. Any more contributions in this section? Sukhminder, I'm looking at you.
No, thank you. I'll just suggest we move on to inequality, because I'll try and keep this very brief. Obviously, we're very supportive about the direction of travel, the proposals, etc. Obviously, there's a lot to be done, a lot of hearing and listening to people, and a lot of action plans that need to be put into place. But as part of those action plans, we need resourcing of those to make sure that those plans become reality. And I guess I'm really trying to ask you, where is the money coming from, and what are the resources going to be, and where within the council will those resources sit?
Liz? Okay, I think, well, the short answer is that I think we are having those conversations this week, I think, and I think we're quite literally discussing options. I think what there basically is a commitment to make sure that those resources do exist, and certainly I've sort of made a sort of personal point of making sure that I attend those working groups and sort of have the opportunity of directly engaging with staff and listening to those concerns and ensuring that we're sort of responding to them. Liz, I mean, I'm conscious that we are sort of in active mid discussion about sort of what our options are. Do you want to take us through it?
Yeah, so we're looking at two options in terms of the resourcing. Oh, there might be more than that, but there's two options on the table at the moment about resourcing in the strategy engagement team for the external piece, as well as resourcing it within HR. I think there's a question mark about the recommendation around the lead equalities post, and that's still being worked through at the moment. There's, you know, from an HR perspective, we've asked for resourcing to support training and development and some additional posts to make sure we move forward this agenda. Whilst we're having those conversations, we're very conscious that the workforce, you know, people are waiting for us to do something. So next week, the communication will come out from me, which is about setting up the rest of the groups, you know, the faith group and the disability group and that. So we're going to have another session and open that up to the whole workforce and say, would you like to come along and hear about that? Do you want to participate in this? So we can get on with that at the moment. We're looking at procuring the training whilst we still have these conversations. And we've got our partners, DWC, coming in to do directorate-wide briefings. So I think the data's been agreed for children, adults and public health and for the place directorate. And we're just agreeing the one for the chief exec's area. And I think that's an opportunity when those briefings are happening to invite cabinet members to attend with, you know, directors and our consultants to show their support for that agenda. So those are being set up at the moment. So some things in progress to make sure that people do understand we are getting on with things while we still have this conversation about the wider resourcing, and the work needs to go on over the next couple of years at least.
Mary?
Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, I think that Unison wants to express its support in seeing that HR is appropriately resourced to deliver on the workforce issues. It seems completely illogical to all of us that HR would be expected to deal with the HR fallouts of inequality issues, and they don't have the resource there to do some of the real cultural changes which we know needs to happen and things like that, and how do you support managers and support people managers to manage in a much more effective way, which is, I think, some of the principles that we're looking for. So it's very much our view that HR should be resourced to deliver, and that whereas we understand from the community, you can understand from our point of view, we're here to represent the workforce. We understand that we're linked to the community because many of us live in the community, but for that's not the driving force behind it. It's for us, it's about the workforce and making sure that working in Ealing, we deal with the inequalities that are of working for this local authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I, in all of the conversations that we had about school workers, I say I retrospectively called it a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. I sort of called them. I sort of once in a conversation that we had internally called them dinner ladies, and sort of thought, am I saying actually is that rather exclusive, and is that sort of a gender stereotype? And the reality is it's not, because the overwhelming majority of those staff are women, and they're BAME, because that is the situation. And I think we've got to always have in mind and be really clear. And I think we know that what those stats tell us about our staff in terms of its diversity, we do have disproportionately a higher number of women and BAME workers in lower paid jobs, and we're not going to sort of be able to deal with some of the huge inequalities that exist within Ealing and within the council if we're not sort of super clear and super honest about that, and that means sort of having some quite difficult conversations, not just as a consequence of these discussions, but also the Race Equality Commission, and sort of be brave and confident to sort of point to where we know those problems exist, both internally within the council, sort of in wider society, but also be sort of super clear that we have to do something about it. And on that note, I'm bringing in Steve. I know that his hand's up, but I think on the issue of sort of resourcing of HR, these are conversations that Steve and I have had. So Steve, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, really, given it's 9 o'clock, so I won't drag it out. But just to say, Liz knows we've had this conversation. I strongly believe, I've always believed, and not just because I've now got responsibility for HR, but I think absolutely, Mary, but without a properly trained, properly resourced, properly empowered HR community, many of the things that we talk about round here either will disappear into the night sky or will be done not in the way that we've mutually agreed that they should be done. And 6, 12, 18, 3 months or 3 years down the line, we or our successors will sit around in a meeting like this, scratching our heads, wondering where it all went wrong. So I believe that. At the same time, all of the while that's all true, all of the constraints around our resource apply for HR as they apply in schools, as they apply in social care, as they apply everywhere else. So, but I truly believe that, because I have seen the effects of undertrained, under-resourced, under-empowered HR communities, through my own career. And I think we got to get that right.
Thanks, Steve. Cast on me. Minda.
Yeah, thanks. Should we move on to wellbeing and mental health? I think we've covered much of the items throughout the meeting, unless my colleagues have got anything further to say.
I see Councillor Donnelly's legacy hand, but I don't see anybody else's.
Okay. I don't see any of my colleagues wanting to come on this point. So shall I move on to item 10, the last and final item, but it's quite a large item. And this is really we've seen some really good positive stuff coming out of Ealing in terms of the school meals contract and about the London living wage, we've been pushing for some time for us to actually sign up and to deliver properly the ethical care charter, and it's obviously a Unison ethical care charter, so we want to have commitment, a timetable to actually signing it and to monitoring it and to ensure that it is actually complied with. And we've had discussions over the contractors, the letting of contracts, to ensure that there is the implementation of a London living wage. But before we get to that, we need to review our contractors. And Steve and I have had this discussion, which is we need to have a spreadsheet of all of the contracts that we have out, what they're there for, what the contract price is London living wage and other, contractual issues such as training and support and career development in place within those contracts. When are they due to come up again, and can we not bring them back in-house? We really need to get on top of that and be a responsible employer and bring back the services within the council. I might as well rattle through the other issues as well to make it shorter. I've got the issue over Broadway Living, and I've sent Steve an email over Broadway Living, because although we're very supportive of the principle of Broadway Living in order to build housing for us, the council, it's about the setup of the Broadway Living unit, and I don't want to see it become another iteration of what we've had in the past, such as Ealing Homes and more akin to the private sector. So I've sent Steve an email, so it'd be helpful to get a response from Steve. And I think the last issue is about settlement agreements, and we need to discuss this with Liz, the so-called non-disclosure agreements. We need to ensure that they're quicker and more reasonable and less tedious in terms of what's been required, and we need to get out of the clause, and that clause shouldn't be there, that you can't return back to the employment of a council within a given period of time. I think it's draconian, it's wrong. I think we need to really look at it and make it more streamlined and make the process a lot quicker. And I'm going to stop there.
And I think what I'd say is, and I think we discussed it a little bit earlier on, there are certain things that we've already sort of committed to as an administration and will be in the council plan, again, that we'll sort of release next time round. And so I speak to a lot of this, and I think there's actually a shared agenda here. So, we absolutely know that we have to be able to use our strategic procurement tools, not just to get us the things that we need in terms of delivery of services, but to help better regulate the labour market, but also to achieve social value. And I've already stressed the need for many of the sort of procurement contracts that we see coming forward that do a 60-40 split, that perhaps don't conform to the council's own policy on using at least 10% of social value. And therefore, we're going to both review our strategic procurement overall. We're going to review our social value policy in terms of what we ask for. And part of that also is about always making sure that we are exploring all options for plural forms of ownership of the organisations that we contract to, or bringing in-house, for example, and always exploring the possibilities and thinking and looking at ways of stripping out dividend, the dividend premium and profit. And we know that we've got some sort of huge challenges in the delivery of public services where there is a market. We know, for example, in the social care sector, that we have care homes in Ealing that are operating at 75% capacity, when sort of the industry standard for break even is 95% capacity. and partly that's about sort of the nervousness of people going into care homes, obviously in the sort of situation of COVID. But if we sort of don't see those numbers increasing back up to the break-even point, then it could well be that we've got sort of a huge problem on our hands with the care home market, and that's not going to be easy for us. So we do have to explore different models and different modes, and partly that's about why we've put so much energy and effort into the Ealing Care Cooperative that the adult social care team have been supporting, to try and find different ways of doing this. But that sort of needs us to sort of do that centrally. One of the consequences of the conversations that we've had with the London Living Wage Foundation, sort of falling out of the conversations around the school meals contract, is actually having a very clear understanding of all of our current contracts and where we are in terms of London Living Wage. And Councillor Donnelly and I have sort of had a number of internal conversations now, sort of make sure that we're in a position that we know that we need to be in for September with the review with the London Living Wage Foundation. As we get through some of those big bits of work, the review of strategic procurement, the review of the social value policy, we'd want to make sure, obviously, that we're sort of bringing that both here and to you directly, and making sure that you're involved in those conversations. Mary?
Yeah, I think that you've covered most of that and everything. I think it is just, for us, we want to see progress. And so, yes, I understand strategically you need to change the direction to make sure that it is. But I think, a clear message needs to go out to the people that procure these things, that they've definitely gone for the cheapest option. They've definitely gone for not even considering what the terms and conditions are. We run this amazing thing with schools catering contract, but that group of staff are still not going to have sick pay. They have still got a lower level of leave than the equivalent of the staff who are working in Ealing. So there's lots of equivalents that we're a long way off of addressing, and we know that you won't be able to resolve some of the issues quickly, like leisure. You're only, I think, a year, 18 months into a 10-year contract. So you're not likely to be able to address pay in that, but you might be able to address some of the bits with them. We know in leisure, for instance, nearly all of the staff will be on 0-hour contracts. Hardly any of them will be on full contracts. And that whole year, this year now, they've got away with not furloughing all those staff and things like that, because they're saying is that you're only workers, you're not employees, so you don't need to be furloughed. And so you've got that whole uncertainty out there. It's not just about money. Money has a massive, significant change, but it is about terms and conditions, and that's what we want to see. We want to see the whole of the workforce in the borough of Ealing being treated with that decency and things like that. And you need to set those examples. So we really welcome your really strong things that you do. And we understand that strategically we've got to change so that we can then deliver. But let's not leave it years, because these staff need to know that you are going to address it and that you're going to deliver in some stage. And we understand that it's going to have constraints on it, but we need to have a plan. And we would welcome, once we get through the next few months, having a plan of knowing what all the contracts are and which ones are likely to come up first. Which ones could we do in the next year? I don't even know which ones are due. The social care ones change constantly. They get renewed almost yearly, and we've done nothing about them and things like that. I think we really want to see not just your promises, we actually want to see delivery and things like that. So I really welcome having further discussions away from this kind of meeting, because this meeting's gone on for far too long now and things like that. And But you all know, you saw the minutes about the last meeting. For all of you who weren't at that meeting, you know that we spent nearly the whole of an hour discussing the issue. And I know that Yvonne was very pulled by my comment, but that is the comment that we need to remember. You know, these staff, so many of these staff are so low paid and treated so poorly, that is the bit that we need to address. We need to grasp that they all deliver something for you, and that they all must be treated in some kind of, you know, decent way, and that we can't just keep ignoring them.
So mindful of Mary's words, but also mindful that there are hands up. I will keep going whilst there are hands up. Danny, over to you.
Thank you for that lovely welcome again. I'll be very brief because Mary has summed up pretty much what I wanted to say. I just can't let her have the last words. It's just me, sorry. No, that was it really. The final point was on the settlement agreements. I think let's have a separate meeting to discuss that. Liz, would be useful. I think somebody from Legal and Democratic Services as well, because we do, you know, it shouldn't be something that's punitive. It's to try and mutually end an employment, and we're finding it causes a lot of difficulties, not just for our members, but for actually the schools who also want to be involved in that, because it's just not working for them. It takes months and things like that. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, thanks everybody. I thought that was a very useful meeting, and hopefully we can continue in that way.
Okay, so I think we have covered off. I think we've covered off everything now, haven't we? So, Minda, unless there's anything else that you sort of springs up, we would sort of do a sort of an AOB, I think, but you guide me on where we think we are.
Can I suggest that we maintain contact, and if we've got issues, we'll raise them with you personally.
Yeah, of course. And I think, you know, I'd say sort of when we formed the new administration, I think we were sort of very keen to want to meet with sort of the representative unions, and you know, we're in active sort of conversations with other unions, perhaps who aren't necessarily here and around this table, around sort of ongoing disputes. And you know, and I think about sort of the length of contracts that we've already discussed. You know, there are contracts with organisations that, you know, are up for renewal in the coming years, and that might be the appropriate point at which we sort of discuss some of those things. But yeah, we're going to sort of absolutely keep having an open dialogue with you. You play in a really important function, and you know, and we've talked about it before, but you know, we will continue to have these discussions, and some of these agenda items are always going to be with us for forever. But we need you to help us be accountable, and that's an important function you play, and we understand that. So that's the spirit I hope that we can continue in. But if there's no more, say thank you very much. I enjoyed this, my first one. Appreciate you all spending your time with us. And the date of the next one, I believe, is the 5th of October. Thanks very much, and have a good evening, everybody. See you soon.
You too.
Take care.